thank you very much for your time with help with this project. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do here, and what you do in general?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Alice Hayes, and I am one of the user experience research principals within the Human Centered Design Centre of Excellence. And we're based in marketing within NatWest Group. So, we are a centralised function that are made up of user experience researchers, user experience designers, we've got visual designers, and copywriters. And essentially, the team is seconded out to different areas of the bank across all of our different brands. Because obviously, I mentioned NatWest Group there, but we have NatWest, RBS, Ulster, Coots, a whole variety of brands with obviously lots of different needs and lots of different customer types as well. So, everything from business customers to retail to wealth and so on. And as I said, lots of members of the team are seconded out to different areas to support projects. At the moment, my research team are currently supporting Premier, Wealth, Rooster, which is a children's savings account, and a few actually internal projects as well. So that's really my team. In terms of what I do, I am looking after obviously the professional development of the team. I also support from a consultancy side of things on strategic, more complex projects that happen across the bank, and support Greg, who's one of my colleagues, another user experience research principal, and he is really sort of championing the research ops side of things, and I'm sort of supporting in the sidelines, as it were, and sharing, experiences I've had in previous roles, and we bounce ideas off each other and kind of try to come up with a plan on how we can tackle the research ops side of things in a better way at
Mhm.
NatWest Group.
Yeah, thank you very much. That sounds very exciting. Um, we had a quick chat before, and your view on user experience research and research ops specifically was very interesting. And I know you have experience in both of in the research ops area as well. Um, it's very difficult to start that conversation because the ops research ops is just developing right now. So, what do you think research ops is, and can you just give a definition from your perspective how it should be defined and what should not be included in research ops?
Okay, so when I think about research ops, I think of everything pretty much that's not related to the insights and the findings, and that's like the hands on getting that insight and findings from customers. So I think of the admin that's involved, that all sits within research ops. So anything from recruitment, templates, documentation, the running of a usability lab like this one, the dissemination of the findings, the sharing of reports, research repositories, maintaining the records. So record retention policies, consent forms. Oh my goodness! The more I think about it, there is so much in
Mhm.
the research ops bucket. And in terms of what it isn't, I would say, I mean, I think probably to some extent, research ops touches a bit of everything, because I talked about earlier about, it not being the insights and findings, but arguably the research repository and the sharing of findings, I think is, partially linked to research ops as a whole. Um, so I wouldn't say that there's not much that isn't in there. It's just really the actual hands-on research. If I was moderating, running a session today, and you were a customer,
Mhm.
I wouldn't say that's anything to do with research ops. I'd say that's my job as a researcher to interview you and then to understand what you're saying, what you're doing, and putting that into a deliverable or an output or sharing that with a team. None of that would be research ops to me.
Interesting. You mentioned that kind of delivering findings to internal clients is a part of the research ops.
Mm-hmm.
I think there is an overlap between research ops and researchers here because I know that in many companies, like in Google, for example, it was our responsibility to deliver everything. So you have to be your own marketing agency to kind of to deliver what you found. Where do you think the border is? Is it like does it depend on the culture of the company, or are there any good practices where researchers just should not spend their time on? like on an internal marketing rather than conducting more research?
Yeah, well, I think that I guess there's a little bit of a nuance there because I think that it's up to the researcher to share, their findings with the project team and internally. But I can think of an example where that would almost be handed over to a research ops person. A researcher on my team recently said that they had done this fantastic piece of research and they'd shared it with their project team. And they delivered a presentation and they'd shared some great video reels. It was really interactive, lots of great feedback, which is fab. Then someone else sent or shared the fact that they'd attended this meeting with another team and they said, well, can you come and do that for us? So she said, of course, I will do that. What ended up happening was there were about 4 or 5 meetings and sessions that she had to run. And she didn't really want to say no because it's really important to share, obviously, the research, but it was taking up a huge amount of her time. And so the conversations that happened afterwards with her were, well, how can we get better at sharing, the important like golden nuggets, as it were, of the research with as many people as we
Mm.
can without taking up too much of your time. So, she was talking about, well, maybe I could do, the first presentation with the direct project team is, interactive and collaborative and exactly how I'd pitched it, but perhaps I do almost a voiceover on a presentation that's a little bit more condensed and then provide my details so that people can follow up with me. And we were just kind of talking about those different ways in which we could, fine tune that. And I think that's an example where, yes, I think the researcher that's done the research should be delivering to begin with, but what happens after that is perhaps something that could fit into a research ops role
Interesting.
because that's their, it's really important that we don't stop that dialogue of, this is the research we've done, this is really great and we should all learn from it. But equally, one of my researchers then needs to start thinking about her next piece of research and she can't be spending, we're talking 2 days really feeding back and altering a presentation to suit that audience and getting the time in the diary with them. And so I think that's probably the fine balance there. When I think about sharing research in I guess raising awareness, doing that internal marketing piece, something that we did at John Lewis was we did a newsletter, I guess, a mail shot. Every Friday we shared what research was happening in the lab the following week. So we had the time slots, we had a contact for each of the pieces of research. So it might be, if I was testing, say, the sofa journey on Tuesday, I'd have the time slots, I'd have, 2 sentences about what it was about. And then it would say, contact Alice for more information, and so on and so on. And we often had, 4 or 5 days booked out. So there was always research going on. And that, we sent it out to everyone. And we had so many observers every single day. We had people coming in. And we always tried to make it so that other researchers were in the observation lab and were able to answer any questions that might be coming up, even when the researcher was doing the actual research. So it kind of created this sense of excitement, but also we could, perhaps answer any questions that would come up or, hopefully dial down any kind of quick, immediate, knee-jerk reactions to change things just from having seen one session. We really kind of
Mm-hmm.
open their minds to, well, let's just wait until we've done the full bit of research and you've spoken to the researcher and they've done their debrief and so on. So, in terms of sharing what was coming up, that was great. And I think that's a research ops kind of example. But we then did a very regular, and this was usually on a fortnightly basis, a mail shot that had the latest reports or latest deliverables. So I think that was an extra bit of admin for us. But if we had a dedicated research ops person, that could be in their realm of things, raising awareness and obviously doing a little bit of internal marketing, but it not taking up too much of the researchers' time who need to actually be on the ground or out in the field and deep in analysis and that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It feels to me that what you're describing is basically creating a system where research is conducted by researchers, but there is a process before and after research happening.
Yeah,
And that process needs to be supported not just occasionally by researchers when they ask to do that and they research, oh, I can figure out how we can do that. It needs to be a proper process managed and planned and conducted by someone. And that
absolutely.
someone is probably interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Summarized it very well.
You described it very well. Um, you've been working in research and partially in research jobs for a pretty long time, right? So
Yes.
you had to kind of touch that area as well. If you could give yourself, when you just started, give yourself advice of what you should do and maybe you shouldn't do, can you give like 30 things you would give as advice to yourself when you just started?
As a researcher or
Re
in a research ops kind of
Probably like
sense?
maybe on the border, connected to research ops.
That's a good one. I just did a careers talk at university, and I kind of summarized that with some advice, and I think I could probably use some of that to answer your question. I think crucially, researchers and anyone that goes into research or research ops, they need to be incredibly organized for one. And I think it's really about the planning and preparation that goes into things. So, what I mean by that is, people are so keen and eager to do work, agile. I say that like that because I don't know many projects that absolutely ace it yet. I don't know many companies that do either. It's all very well kind of using that term, but I see very little it applied in the correct way. So, there's often this rush to get research out, but actually, if you spend a little bit more time in the planning stages and you're really able to prepare for it, you'll do a better job overall in terms of the findings that you get at the end, the ability to debrief in a really efficient way, but also bringing the right people in early on so that you can make sure that it's going to be an effective use of your time as a researcher, but also you're going to be getting the right participants and so on. So I would say key bit of advice is being organised, making sure that you've got planning time, and not necessarily feeling like you've got to rush and you've just got absolutely everything out the door, supersonic time. Um, I would say utilise insights of people around you who are in the field and in your team. We have a session in my team that I've recently introduced called Let's Bounce. And that's really just a regular session where we bounce ideas off each other. And it can be anything from a challenge that we're having within a project, or it can be something as little as, how can we get better at sharing research? Or, I've been using, this is an example, I've been using FigJam as a kind of workshopping tool. And I think this is a really good way of doing something, but have you used it and what did you do? So it's kind of sharing tool knowledge, sharing, experience with methods. It's also sharing kind of top tips for general housekeeping from a research ops sense. And so I think, being organized, having the ability to share insight with others externally and internally. And I think thirdly is just being proactive and admitting that you're not always going to get it right, and that there's not, I think nothing's perfect and every day is a school day. So one thing might work one day, but a week later, you might think, actually, I could do it better. And just being open minded to that.
This is what I like about research. Like every day you go to work and you don't know what's going to happen. It's like
Never.
yeah,
No,
it's not going to
absolutely.
be a conveyor line. It's like it's going to be exactly the same as it used to be yesterday.
I
It's like
know. Well, do you know what? Someone said, what's a typical day look like in this career talk? And I said, it's not a typical day.
hmm
Every day is different.
yeah.
And I think that's what's
I
fun,
think this
isn't
is
it?
what typical. Yeah, everything is different. Do you think that there are some misconceptions about research jobs? What do you think should not be in the realm of research jobs that a lot of people believe is? I know it's a tricky one.
That is a really tricky question. Yeah. I
I,
think,
sorry, I can give one example. There was recently a research ops conference, and somebody from the audience asked what kind of what is a measurable example of a research ops kind of delivering something to the organization, and one of the answers was. If you save money, for example, you used two tools and now you can use one because you can organize the process and you
hmm
can save, let's say, I don't know, $20,000 per year on not paying for subscription. And a lot of research ops people I talked to, they said that's a very bad example because research in general, not about saving money for the organization, it's about kind of opening new markets. So if you work on a product that can bring, like, let's say, $1 billion, and if you save 10,000 per year because you optimize some internal process, you're not contributing to that bigger part that kind of you would be able to if you spent some time on something more crucial. And as you said, there are a lot of things, a lot of parts of the puzzle are missing from that bigger part. So like spending things on optimizing small visible bits is not super important all the time.
Yeah. So what I'm interested then.
Mhm.
So what did they say would be a better way of measuring it then?
Again, I think it's a tricky one because like from our perspective, I've been thinking for a pretty long time about what's the cost of research or cost of research ops in general. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there are two parts there. First one is there's a visible part where we can put together in one bucket like how much we pay for researchers, how much we pay for facilities and everything else, and like this is the cost, right? At the same time, if we remove research completely from the organization, it's not like we're saying that this bit and this is like the number of the table, right? We are losing a lot of opportunities on the market, and for different companies, it's going to be different.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that, like for Google, for example, Google's mottos was follow the user and everything else follows. So to follow the user, you actually need to know what you're following,
Yeah.
right? So you need to understand who the user is, what they need, and so on. So I would say that for big IT companies right now, at least maybe, I don't know, one quarter, one third of their sustainable business is understanding what clients actually need.
Mm-hmm.
So if we look at their, I don't know, big company like Facebook, for example, I don't remember how much they made last year, but it's tens of billions, right? So one quarter of that is going to be, let's say, I don't know, $80 billion.
Yeah.
Uh, if we believe that research infrastructure that allows us to follow users scalably, not just every now and then, right? If the research infrastructure is an important part of that, let's say it's only 10%, I think it's very, very conservative. That means that research infrastructure costs for organization like $8 billion per
Yeah.
year. So if you have, let's say, 100 labs, that means that each lab is $80 million per year. So if you save on the lab, let's say $100,000 this year, yay, fantastic. But you actually lost 7,900,000.
Yeah.
So again, going back to your question, I think there is this kind of spectrum. One part is very easy to measure, and this is where, like, if people fight for the budget, they need to have some arguments why we need that budget and how we can save that and how we can be efficient. And there's another part of the spectrum where organization actually gets the result from research, much more difficult to define and difficult to measure, but this is the real picture.
Mm-hmm.
So I think can we try that argument with a couple of clients, and I was very surprised that it actually worked. Like if you start seeing your research infrastructure as a part of the bigger equation where each lab, for example, or each research facility actually can bring, let's say, $80 million per year, then it's a completely different story what you should and shouldn't do, and what you should focus on, and what you should
Mm.
who you should hire and how much you need to spend, and what authorities that those people working on those facilities should have. So sorry, I'm not sure if I answered
No,
the question.
no, you did, you did. I think it just makes me think of something that I find myself saying a lot to stakeholders and to companies that I have worked for in the past is, without user research, you are just guessing. And so what I mean by that is you're saying, you know, it's not necessarily about the cost of the researchers, it's about what you might not get if you don't have them as much as what
That's a
you
very good
will
summary.
get.
It's like a cost of not having research.
Exactly that. So when I talk to projects and they're like, oh, we're not going to do research, or I don't have time to do research, I was like, well, that's fine, but well, I never say that's fine, but I say, okay, but without user research, we are just guessing here on whether this is going to work or not. So we can get very far down the line and you can launch it, and we can have cost ourselves a lot of money here by launching a product that doesn't work, or we can do some research now and reduce the risk. It's never about knowing the answer. You're never going to know absolutely 1,000,000% how something's going to land by doing multiple rounds of usability testing.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not going to happen. But what you're going to do is you're going to reduce the risk of surprises and of something failing. So it's about reducing risk rather than, I know for 100% sure that this is going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And so I think that's the approach that we should be taking. We should all be saying, instead of, oh, research costs £10,000, let's just say, for a large piece of work, let's just say, well, actually, it's going to cost us £10,000 now. But if we were to look at what the risk would be, we're probably saving ourselves 60 or much, much more
Mm-hmm.
in the grand scheme of things. So I completely get your point. I think that's a great way of looking at it. I think it's that's a good conversation for people to have about, why are you doing it? Is it just a tick box exercise? Do you just see it as money going out rather than you saving in the long run? And I think that's why you need to have like concrete examples of where you've done research and when you've made a decision either to do something or not to do something. Someone on my team recently did some research for Rooster, and they the kind of decision that was made was that they weren't going to go forward with a particular feature at all, and that research said to them not to do anything. Okay, but how expensive it would have been for us not to have done the research, us to build this feature, push it out, and then it just be completely useless. And so it's as much as about what we should be doing as about what we shouldn't be doing on
Mm-hmm.
products or in products.
In your experience, how often did you have cases when you started research and basically it confirmed most of the important assumptions by your internal client, and client was like, yeah, it's exactly what we expected?
Yeah, that's definitely happened.
You've had,
Yeah.
like in my case, I think it was like it never happened in my like
No,
20 years in this
it
area.
it has happened. It has happened. And I think that's been where product owners and that the some of them, are probably more on the kind of business requirement side rather than the customer side. But I have worked with some product owners who have had an inkling about something and they've been like, I think this might be a problem, or I think this might be the case, but I really need to understand it from a user perspective. And they've fully supported doing
Hmm.
research, and we've just kind of like confirmed their assumptions. And that's been,
Oh, makes sense. Yeah.
you know, really a really good thing to do, because we're kind of saying like, let's not make an educated guess about this. Let's actually do it with real
Hmm.
customers.
I mostly meant the whole product when when people design and plan everything like from in advance from the beginning, which is the conceptual phase, and then they go to the lab and everything is like at least most of the most important assumptions confirmed. I meant that in this case, I've never seen it happening.
Oh,
Like
I
in most of the cases, like,
see.
oh god, it's so good we conducted research because it would be a failure immediately, and we know that now, that one day into the study.
Yes, I get what you mean. Yes, then that's a different.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I should have rephrased the question.
No, no. It's my interpretation. No, I see what you mean now. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because everyone has such high expectations, particularly when they're personally invested in it. And I think what research does is it comes from a completely unbiased, neutral perspective, and that we've like got this huge like weight, I guess, to take something and test it and make sure that we're doing it justice in terms of making sure that we're speaking to the right customers, making sure that we've chosen the right method and we've got, a good sample size, whatever method that might be for, making sure that we're making it robust, reliable, all those sorts of things. And I think when we've like invested heavily enough in those areas and you've got a supportive team, you won't find that you'll be in that instance. But unfortunately, it's often like a tick box, or people are, like I say, too just personally invested in something. And so they don't really see the value, or they just run with something and think, oh no, it's just so amazing. I don't need to do any of the testing.
It's amazing how complex the world is. It's
I
like
know.
we can have a fantastic mental model of how it should work, and then as soon as you start testing, it just falls apart immediately.
But isn't it amazing though, when you first start testing? I think uh, even, I don't really do any tactical research anymore, but when you're watching a session and something just like clicks and you just see this customer just kind of struggling, even now having been in research for so many years, I still get that feeling of like, isn't this amazing that we're doing
I totally
this?
agree. Yeah.
And it's just, you see other observers around you, like product owners or BAs or whoever it might be in the project team, and they're just like, my goodness, I never thought they'd do that. Or they'd be like, why aren't they clicking there? Or why aren't they doing this? Or, you know, or even something just as from an empathy perspective, we've done a lot of research on things like overdrafts and cost of living crisis, which is obviously a really important topic right now. And, that has been a great way of us enlightening, senior stakeholders as to what people feel like right now in this moment when it's financial, and which obviously everyone has to handle money. Everyone has to, pay for the bills. They have to put a house, like have to put a roof over their heads even. And so I think it's so sensitive, and often you can become further and further away from it, and you can almost make some assumptions or not realize how challenging it can be. But when you get the research and you can see customers talking about, I'm not sure how I'm going to pay off my overdraft this month, and I'm really worried about talking to the bank because, what if they realize that I can't afford it and then they take it away completely? Or I've got no idea how I'm going to pay my credit card bill and I can't sleep at night because of it. All those sorts of things are so important, and that's why I think that the value of research is still, undervalued actually. Companies always talking about being customer centric, using all the customer words in the world, but there's not enough to that's being done in any organization, I don't think, with customers still. There should be more chief research officer roles, in my opinion, because then that would be a seat at the table where you can influence more from a strategic level. So, you know, doing more research on time horizons, like what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years' time, rather than always handling like the tactical BAU or even discovery pieces now, which is just looking at, you know, a possible product. We're never looking very, very far in advance. Do you know many organizations that do that? I don't.
Nope.
Like, we're never thinking, what will our customers need later down the line, or what are the big life moments, or, what can we do now that won't give us any return on investment now, but it'll make an impact in 3 to 5 years' time, which will pull us apart from our competitors.
I think that's a very interesting question. I know that we're running out of
No, it's
time.
all right,
Sorry.
carry on.
So I think one benefit of working, for me personally, working for Google was, in many cases, Google tried to understand what's going to happen with the world or right now, or in 5 minutes, or in 5 years. And I think it used to be when I worked there that in many projects, it wasn't about kind of, okay, so we have an idea how we're going to make profit on that. It was, okay, we have an idea, let's try it to understand if the idea actually works. And
Yep.
then if we understand what people actually need, down the line, maybe like in 50 years, we will find a way how to monetize that. If we can find a new niche that wasn't discovered before and we can make a product first, then we can refine the product and we can make it a whole ecosystem around that. And then eventually it might be successful in financial terms. So I think I've seen a couple of companies doing that, but I completely agree. It's very, very rare.
Very rare, and I think, you know, I'd almost expect it from the likes of Google and, perhaps some of the other really large companies that are doing UX in a big way. But if you think about it from like retail, probably a lot of finance companies, even agencies, and don't really hear them pitching
Hmm.
those sorts of projects because they probably know that they're not going to be
Yeah,
commissioned.
it's very difficult to
But
sell. Yeah.
I'd really like to see more of that in the future, and something that I'm certainly going to be hoping to implement in the next role that I take on.
Uh, Going back very quickly to research ops, one thing you said resonated a lot because I've had multiple cases when, for example, we conducted studies and we knew that there was an issue with the problem. Then we spent, let's say, half a year persuading all the stakeholders, developers, designers, and everybody else that there isn't very, very important issue and that everybody had their own priorities. Uh, what we started to do in the end, we started to bring people in the lab so they can see the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing to see after half a year of battles, people like, yeah, there is an issue. Let's just fix it. Like the product is completely unusable if we don't fix it. So let's scrap all other priorities. Let's focus on that. So being able to connect, as you said, those kind of findings, not in terms of there are a couple of lines on the report, but I can actually see a human being struggling with that, and I can kind of resonate with that, even though it's just one person. As soon as I see it, I immediately understand why they're struggling with that, and that it's not going to be kind of one-off example. Everybody was going to struggle because now, as soon as I see it, it's obvious.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to deliver some kind of basic, like almost share researcher experience from the lab with a larger organization,
Mm.
which is, I'm not sure if it's a researcher responsibility. Partially, I think that is, but to be able to do that, they need a structure, as you said, in the process to be able to do that. Um, can you just share a couple of thoughts on that?
Well, I think they need a structure. I think they need to have almost like a toolkit that has different options of ways to share that information. So what I mean by that is, you know, I agree. It's so eye-opening when you're able to see it for yourself, but not everyone can get to the lab and watch the session.
Hmm.
Obviously you can do, some video reels if you wanted to, either of the person and what's happening on the screen, or it might just be a screen recording. But you also need to think quite creatively about how you're going to reach people that you can't even show videos to, or perhaps videos aren't even an option because of sharing restrictions. I have heard of some organizations where you can only share the video in the meeting, the debrief meeting, rather than sharing videos widely because of obvious reasons for consent and looking after customers' data. So we've I think in multiple projects here we've tried a variety of different things. We have sent postcards to people with top findings on. We have done
Like physical postcards.
physical postcards. Yeah, physical
Wow.
postcards. We have done top 5 findings in a newsletter. So similar to what I mentioned earlier about having a mail shot which said, what research is coming up. We did one with recent reports at John Lewis. More recently here, we've done top 5. So for each project, we just pick the top 5 findings that we need to land, rather than them reading a report or a mural or any other output that you might be creating. We've got 5 things to read. What do we want them to what do we want to land with the people that we're emailing? And then they have the opportunity to follow up and read on if they want to, but at least we're making sure that they're getting those 5 key takeaways. Also putting things up on group areas, so creating posters that people can read, coffee and tea, water, that sort of thing. People often linger around those areas, and if you can get something that's kind of a little bit attention grabbing, then that's great. And also the voiceover of presentations, I think, is a good one. um, Obviously going to stand-ups and talking through things, anything that can add colour to your findings, rather than it just be, this is the report, this has showed this. Anything that you can kind of inject that customer lens is really, well, not the lens, but the customer themselves, whether that's through quotes, through videos, anything like that, I think is super helpful. But I think, in answer to your question, it's got to be lots of different mediums. I had one senior stakeholder about 3 years ago who said, I really love your research, I really love hearing about it, but I don't want to sit down for too long to go through any kind of PowerPoint. I don't want to really go through any kind of mural workspace or anything like that. I'm going to have 10 minutes every Thursday and I just want to be on my feet. And so what often happened is I put printouts around a room like this, and I had perhaps other members of the team that could talk through some of the changes that we're proposing making kind of littered around the room as well. And we essentially spent 10 minutes just walking around, and I'd talk through and have post-it notes up. They wouldn't sit down, they were on their feet, it was quite energetic. I had people just kind of swinging yeah, so based on this is what we're proposing, what do you think to that? And they'd be like, yeah, that sounds great. And then they were out again. And so that wasn't what I did for everyone, but that seemed to work for that senior stakeholder who had made it very clear what they did and didn't like, which was fine. So I kind of just modified what I need to do. That's that kind of grand thing that researchers have to do, is to change what they need to do to deliver research for their audience. It's all about kind of adapting, isn't it? And sometimes that might be standing up and doing something in a stand-up, a little segment on research. Sometimes it might be having a fortnightly meeting in the diary that doesn't move, has everyone possible invited to, and you prepare something a little bit more formal. Sometimes it might be doing the video reels, like show and tell. So yeah, there's kind of a huge variety of things that you can do, but you have to be creative. You have to learn your audience. I hope that answers your question.
Yes. I paused because there are so many different things that I would ask a lot of follow-up questions, but I know that you're running out of time. So
Oh, what's the time? Oh,
yeah,
we're gonna do 5 more minutes.
okay. For people who just starting in this area,
Yeah.
what would you like? recommend maybe like any practical steps or um, any places where they can learn something or methods of how they should learn, maybe in general about research ops or about research ops required in their organization?
I think there's a lot out there that you can learn just by searching, and I mean that in the sense of, the likes of Medium. People go and write about their own experiences, and you can get quite a lot of insight about people who have littered it all across different organisations and industries, which I think is quite insightful. Not necessarily as a best practice, but just to understand people are doing it in a certain way, reflecting on it and thinking, would that work for me, or would that work for an organisation, or how would I approach that problem? Um, I also think actually just trying to take on a case study. So that works for both a research and a research ops role, right? So if I'm new into UX research and I really want to land a job at, let's just say, John Lewis, I would then go on their website and I'd set myself a task of like choosing an area to test, and I'd test with friends and family, and I write a discussion guide, and I think about what the recruitment brief would be like if I wasn't using opportunistic sampling, which is friends and family, all that sort of good stuff, and then that case study would be a way of me demonstrating to John Lewis, I've actually gone out there and I've tried to use your website as an opportunity to test with friends and family. This is what I've come up with.
Interesting.
But it also would be a good test for me to think, am I confident? Like, oh, I've just recorded myself with, let's just say, my sister. My moderating skills were a little bit rusty, or, perhaps I asked too many, or perhaps I asked a double-barreled question, or perhaps my questions were quite leading, and I'd be able to go away and work on that before I then went for another interview, let's just say. So that's from a research perspective. I also think that works from a research ops perspective. So anyone that's going into research ops now will have a good idea of what that role is going to entail, right? And they'll be thinking, okay, so it's going to be a little bit about the kind of organization of documentation templates. It's going to be about recruitment. Perhaps you're going to be the middleman between research and recruitment agencies. Perhaps you're going to create your own customer panel, and that's going to be up to you to kind of like really set up and understand what the needs and requirements are and manage that going forwards. Maybe that's something that's going to be a large part of your role. Maybe it'll be that there's not a consent form that's approved by legal yet, so you're going to have to go away and look at that and then work with legal. So I think that works the same way. I'd choose a company and I'd be like, oh, I wonder what challenges they're going to have, or I wonder what they're going to have to do day to day from a research ops perspective. What would I do? But ultimately, if I was being super honest, if I was going to go into research ops role as a junior, I would look at someone like Emma Bolton's 8 pillars, and I would be like, I'm going to just unpick each one of these things and see where I can add value, or how I would approach that. Because that's a framework that, a lot of people have adopted, and it's very thorough. And I do think, part of me thinks like, don't try and reinvent the wheel. Look at what other people have done and researched in many different companies, and Emma's currently at Facebook. She is a research leader there. She has obviously set up a community, a research ops community, which is like all around the world, and they're constantly sharing their insights and the challenges that they're facing. And I think, what better place to kind of learn and start to formulate a picture of how you would do that role than around others, and learning from what's already been introduced in other places, personally anyway.
Very interesting. I totally agree. I think what you kept kind of repeating, stressing the importance of the process
Mm-hmm.
and not doing it because you feel that it needs to be done today and then tomorrow you can switch to something else. Like building a proper process so that they can support both your whole team and your internal clients on the other side. So I totally agree that even if that structure doesn't work for your company, it's much better to have a structure and then change it gradually than just starting from scratch and trying to reinvent completely everything.
Absolutely, because that's it. Well, researchers do it, right? What existing data or knowledge do we have on this topic? It's exactly the same, but from a research ops perspective. And I think, like you say, use that as a foundation and then build it out, and you'll learn what does and doesn't work for you. Something that's in those, for example, the 8 pillars might not be appropriate to a really small scale company, or it might might be insufficient for a huge company. You won't know until you start unpicking them, but at least you have a foundation, a starter for 10, and then you can put your own mark on it. That's what I
And I
do.
especially liked your idea of piloting first. It's kind of research for researchers. Before you conducting a
Yes,
proper research, you conduct like a small research and adjust the whole project.
definitely. Definitely. Always pilot. It's always helpful.
Nice. Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time,
You're welcome.
for your ideas.
It's been my
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you very much. Best of luck with the rest of your series of conversations with people.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.